Shivaya Om. Om Namah 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 Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Namah Shivaya Om. Om
Shivaya Om.
Om
Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om
Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya
It'll seep in
Om.
to their consciousness.
Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Namah Shivaya Om. Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
So I want to show like Britney Spears has the craziest Instagram you've ever seen. She loves to like pull her panties like all the way down to the top of her punani, and it's
Om Namah Shivaya
Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om.
Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya Om. Om Namah Shivaya 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 Om Namah Shivaya
Some settings are in Namah
Shivaya
You might then wish to operate without Thanksgiving.
Om Namah Shivaya 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 Om.
The Tree of Life. The Kabbalah is an archaic system of Jewish mysticism. For us moderns, the Jewishness may readily be omitted, and most of its mysticism may also be left out, leaving only a simple philosophical or mathematical structure called the Tree of Life. Almost a century ago, unpenetrating
I am the power of
with admiration at
Tauti.
the sight of a doctrine so simple and at the same time so absolute. The necessary union of ideas and signs, the consecration of the most fundamental realities by primitive characters, the trinity of words, letters, and numbers. A philosophy simple as the alphabet, profound and infinite as the Logos. Theorems more luminous and complete than those of Pythagoras. A theology which may be epitomized by counting on the fingers. An infinity which can be held in the hollow of an infant's hand. 10 numerals and 22 letters, a triangle, a square, and a circle. Such are the elements of the Kabbalah. Such are the primary principles of the written word, shadow of that spoken Logos which created the world. Each student has the task to ascertain for himself, where the Kabbalah is concerned, what must be considered true and reliable, and to set up on his own score a reliable standard of reference. This standard can only be spiritual experience. For this reason, the tree of life has been adopted as the framework of practical magic, since it is in the first place open to synthetic and constructive classification, and because it provides what may suitably be called a magical alphabet. It must be noted that the word alphabet is used, and it is so used in preference to the word language and the developments therefrom. The Kabbalah does not attempt to provide a complete magical language or an entire philosophy. Only by spiritual experience may the latter be acquired. But from the alphabet of ideas, numbers, and symbols, and the intimations which it presents, the student may find himself enabled, with the aid of magical research, and with the aid of the inner spiritual experience, to construct a satisfactory edifice of a high philosophy which will take him through life. Previously, the tree of life was considered as a numerical symbol of the orderly progression of the universe from ideality, as a classifying medium to which to refer systematically the spiritual hierarchies, and finally, as a frame of reference for ideas, symbols, and signs which enter into practical magic. The Sephiroth may be thought of as cosmic forces, as emanations whose chief sphere of operation is in the macrocosm. The Sephiroth, I might add, are the basic concepts to be found on the Tree of Life. The crown, theorems more luminous and complete than those of Pythagoras, a theology which intimized by counting and deafness, a sublime assistant through the fleeting ages. It is by definition a metaphysical and spiritually sensitive point of consciousness, indivisible, supreme, the center from which flows all the energy and all the forces of man. As direct vehicles are the next two Sephiroth, the powers of Chachma and Binah, wisdom and understanding, the two manifested poles of the creative instrument which it employs. Yet not only are they instruments, but they are in reality the highest aspects of the activity of the spiritual being, whose hallowed light is infinite and eternal. In man, these two Sephiroth are represented by principles which we call the will and intuition. Existing on the creative plane, representing the potencies emanating from the divine self in the archetypal world, the will and soul constitute with the self the imperishable, unchanging man. Yet so absurd are the ways of man, and so far have we drifted from essentials, that few of us consciously realize our essential Godhood.
So why don't you show like Britney
Like Christ, like Buddha, like Krishna, are sons of God, gods in all verity. As the will is the active, energetic, creative power in man, and inasmuch as in practical magic, the wand is the ceremonial instrument of creation, so is the wand the true symbol of the spiritual will, one, upright, towering to the heavens, a mighty and irresistible power of creation. The intuition, being in opposition to will on the tree, is feminine and passive, representing the true spiritual vision of the soul, or imagination. Like the chalice on the altar, it is ever open to receive the dictates and commands issuing from above. To it also is referred the spiritualized imagination, which, with the will, are the powers par excellence utilized in magic. The more one opens oneself to the divine will and the divine imagination of the inner self, the greater does one become in the manifestation of one's Godhood, an oracle of the Most High, a spotless vehicle of the purest spiritual fire. Below the abyss, the next 5 Sephiroth are named the human soul, a composite principle of reason, will, imagination, memory, and emotion, centered in the Sephira of harmony. It is this mind which is the evolutionary vehicle of the real self, a mechanism, so to speak, created through long eons of toil and suffering, as a means of acquiring contact with the outside world, so that by means of the experience thus obtained, the self may come to a self-conscious realization of its own divine powers and high nature. It is in this mind that self-consciousness is centered. Although the psychological anomaly is true, that this perceptual mechanism, evolved solely as an instrument, comes to usurp the power of that which gave it birth, setting itself on a pedestal as the ego, as that which has real power, insight, will, and the ability to solve the problems of life. In magic, it is this empirical ego, this lower self, which must be offered up in sacrifice to the higher self. As the concept of sacrifice implies that that which is renounced should be the best and the greatest sacrifice. As much as in practical magic, the wand is the ceremonial instrument of creation. So is the wand the true spiritual realm, is the greatest sacrifice which the student can lay upon the altar as an offering to the Most High. He that loses his life shall find the irresistible power of creation. Lest there be intuition, being in opposition to will on the tree, and as feminine and passive sacrifice of the ego. Let it be understood clearly that the principle itself is not destroyed. That, of course, is an impossibility in nature. But the false values of the ego, its complacency, the illusion that it possesses, that it alone is real and permanent, all else being its creations, these are offered for destruction. When the smugness and the false egoism in the mind is rooted out, it is an instrument of the soul than which few could be better. The 9th Sephira is the foundation of the lower man. It is the Freudian id, and it is that lunar, vegetative, and instinctual principle which is concerned solely with man. This animal soul is at one and the same time a principle of energy and electromagnetic substance. The totality of the vital life currents, as well as the invisible magnetic mold on which the gross atoms arrange themselves as the physical body. As a substantive principle, it is the astral body, the classic double built of astral substance, to serve as the basis or design of the physical body. It pertains to the instincts and impulses, acting as an automatic storehouse of sensations and impressions, just as the old term, the collective unconscious, may well be applied to the more archaic concept of the astral light. All the fundamental instincts of a man, the primal root impulses which he experiences, are of the Sephira of Yesod, the foundation from which all life energy flows. All of these principles obtain in and function as a living organism in the principle of the physical body, attributed to the 10th and last Sephira of the Tree of Life, called the Kingdom. It is the seat of every force and function of all the subtle planes of nature and every spiritual power of man. In all truth, and in this fundamental sense, the human body is in reality the temple of the Holy Ghost. William James, in his Gifford Lectures of the early part of this century, wrote that one conclusion that was forced upon him as a result of certain experiments that he had conducted had forced upon him that it is our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, while all about it, parted from it by only the flimsiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without even suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch, they are there in all their completeness. Definite types of mentality, which probably somewhere have their field of application and adaptation. Magic is the name for some archaic psychological methods which, to use James' term, apply the requisite stimulus to reveal other and deeper levels of consciousness which are ever present, but remain as a rule totally unsuspected. Once this magical stimulus is applied, and these levels are tapped, there occurs what has been labeled illumination, the flooding of the mind with light. Before I was blind, but now I see. This so-called transcendental experience, to be reached by ritual and other technical procedures, is the heart of this archaic, Kabbalistic, and magical system, and can hardly be guessed at, save by some shrewd and penetrating modern psychologists such as Carl Jung and A. Maslow. It is with the mind with which I wish in particular to occupy myself at some little length. Although it comprises the 5 Sephiroth, numbered 4 to 8 inclusive, its central seat is in Kitover, so-called, the sphere of harmony and equilibrium. One problem which concerns the magician is the fact that inherent in the mind is a principle of self-contradiction which prevents its use. The body is in reality the temple of the Holy Ghost for truth and light. Using the reason alone, man can never come to any true realization of what he is in himself. That is, he can never understand by the mind alone that he is an eternal spiritual entity, a brilliant star, shining by the light of its own essence within the bespangled body of the infinite space. Iamblichus lays the law down quite clearly in the Mysteries, that not by discursive reasoning or through philosophic thinking alone does one come into fellowship with the gods. It is through the awakening of the higher spiritual powers by means of the rite of magic that we have already defined that the consummation of the long ages is effected. What we call so casually the imagination in the ordinary man is, according to the exponents of magic, the major faculty of the soul to assimilate the images and reflections of these other levels of awareness of which James speaks. The imagination is the vision of the soul, whereby it perceives directly and immediately ideas and thoughts of every kind. The spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola are really one specific form of magical procedure. There, Loyola counsels his disciples to relive in the sphere of the imagination all the events in the outward historical life of Jesus. By this method, they are to train their imaginations to see, touch, smell, and taste those invisible things and rehearse those incidents long since accomplished and vanished, which were perceived through the senses of their incarnated Lord. Saint Ignatius desires the imagination to be exalted to its uttermost. If you are meditating on an article of faith, he would have you construct the locality clearly and with exactitude before the vision of the mind's eye, to observe it carefully and closely, even to touch it, as it were. If it be hell, for example, he gives you burning rocks to handle. He makes you float in a...
What your point is, Yaakov? My point for what Rabbi was saying about the Arab, you don't, today we don't need it to be in a primarily Jewish area. But he was right for saying it was created for when Jews were in segregated communities all by themselves.
Exactly, so that's the difference we have. Well, I don't believe in the development
Frightful darkness as thick as pitch. He places liquid sulfur upon your tongue. Your nostrils are filled with a stench as of hell itself. And he shows you torments, causing you to hear excruciating groans. He would have you also construct the vision of Calvary, with the glorified Christ crowned with thorns on the cross, accomplishing the redemption of mankind, surveying the heavens with pained eyes, while calling upon his Father in heaven. He would have you envisage the startling wonder of the resurrection and the miracles performed long ago in Palestine. All this, St. Ignatius bids your will to create in imagination by constant exercise, and thus, in this way, apply James's stimulus to reveal these other levels of consciousness which are present at every moment of our lives. Perseverance and constant application will certainly bestow upon the student a will which is indomitable, a mind capable of prolonged concentration, and above all, an imagination which is the essence of creativeness. One of the exercises that is analogous to those recommended by St. Ignatius is on a more prosaic level. The student is to picture to himself, for example, that is sitting by a mighty waterfall, a Niagara, and before his inner eye, let him create an image of the river high up in its source, murmuring and rambling peacefully along. Then let him conceive of its gradual approach to the precipice, wild torrents of maddened waters, swirling hither and thither in churning cascades of lightning against the rocky boulders,
which were perceived through the senses of their incarnated orb.
over the edge.
Saint Ignatius.
Imagine these thousands of tons of water surging headlong over the precipice with a constant
If you were meditating on an article of faith,
conceive
you
them
would have to construct the locality clearly and with exactitude before the vision of the mind's eye, to observe it carefully and closely, even to touch it as it were. If it be
and upon hearing marvel, the deep, thunderous voice of the terrific impact of their volume against the lower rocks and waters. The student may also construct in imagination more familiar things: the noise of a speeding train, the taste of chocolate, the smells of sweet perfumes and incenses, and the touch of burning coal. Not only must the imaginative formulation of the sense be distinct, that is to say, the taste of chocolate and other sweet caramels, for example, should be clearly imagined. And also the students should so train themselves as to sustain or prolong the image or impression. By these efforts of the imagination, its power will germinate and grow, developing beyond conception, and with the passage of time, a new power of creativity and vision will come to it. Similarly, in the Hindu system, there is the prescription of meditation for much the same purpose on the platforms, or the colored symbols of the elements, of which they claim 5.
So his intention seems to...
Combinations of these 5 produce 4 sub-elements and elements. The pictorial symbols of which
principle. That's
make remarkably good objects for the exercise of the imagination. There is a red triangle for fire,
what
a
does
horizontal silver crescent for air,
what
a blue
is
circle
magic?
for water, a yellow square for earth,
He can't stop
and a
thinking
black
about you.
egg
He
for
told you
spirit.
this was going to be your last.
A combination of any two symbols, such as a red triangle surmounting a silver crescent, or a small blue circle placed in the middle of a yellow square, seem in a most singular way to stand out from the dark background of the inner vision and to stimulate all the powers of the imagination. Only a short time suffices to procure efficiency in the visualization of these symbols. In his introduction to a book entitled The Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali, William Q. Judge made the statement that the ancient Hindu sages knew the secret of the development of the will and how to increase tenfold both its power and efficacy. This secret of the ages, the enhancement of the power of will and wisdom, has never really been lost. Will, to the student of the divine magic, is the primary factor in the production of whatever spiritual changes he proposes. The will is neither good nor bad. It is power only, and so vitalizes all things alike. In a sense, here is where a certain danger of magic intrudes. It is not enough for the student to become God-intoxicated and wrapped in the knowledge and conversation of his higher self. Great as this is in itself, it is not yet enough. For into him whose mind is disorderly and ignorant and poorly disciplined, the gods pour their wine in vain. Because the mind is abdicated to reach a higher synthesis and a nobler kind of consciousness, there is no cause to neglect the application of that faculty to the matters pertaining to its own place in nature. That is why, Under the ancient systems, grammar, philosophy, science, and logic were taught to cultivate and so improve the mind, and mathematics too, because the methods of that science were disciplinary and orderly. Geometry, music, and the arts were also inculcated, and a system of symbols was deduced therefrom. Now, the consequence of all these disciplines is obvious. As time progresses through this technique, the student accomplishes two separate things, both of them being major aspects of what we have come to call the great work. A perpetual vigilance, approximating the most powerful current of willpower, has been generated. This, from the beginning, tends to bring all the activities of the human being under conscious control of the will. The second aspect of accomplishment is that not only does the student find himself in possession of a greatly enhanced will, but that the mind itself, all the faculties comprised in the ego, previously so troublesome and lacking in concentration, has gradually, because of the dynamic will and these various disciplines, has been placed under control. And in this way, the student becomes enabled to fulfill the terms of what James so eloquently wrote. We apply the necessary stimulus, and there we find in all their completeness these definite types of consciousness which must play an enormous role in the future evolution of mankind. The gods of Egypt. The Egyptians, like most primitive peoples, were polytheists. Their pantheon was very extensive. We must not fall into the serious error of equating primitive with stupid. On the contrary, the state of Egyptian art, architecture, and astronomy indicate a high degree of intellectual attainment. We are forced to the assumption, then, that there must be more to their polytheism than at first meets the eye. Primitive man did not create the gods, as think so many modern students of comparative religion, who are destitute of all sympathy and religious genius. What primitive man really did, perhaps unconsciously, was to apply names and quasi-human faculties to these powers or great forces of nature, which he so accurately observed, and which he believed rightly enough to be manifestations or symbols of the divine. All the thoughts and ideas, all the great learning and knowledge of the Egyptians found their pictorial expression in allegory, parable, and painting. The evidence presents itself simply that these many Egyptian gods, all symbolic of the various creative aspects of divinity, are emergents from a ground of being or Godhead, which perhaps the average person in earlier days could never have conceived, but which was tacitly assumed by the priestly class. The famous Egyptologist Wallace Burge confirms this idea, stating, "The learned understood the meaning of symbols and paid their adorations through them to the truths of which they were the coverings." This is not dissimilar to the lofty abstract mysticism of Meister Eckhart, which could hardly have been appreciated by, for example, a 13th century German or Italian peasant, who angrily might place an image of a saint in a dark cupboard for not having fulfilled the supplicant's wish or prayer. At the head of the Egyptian pantheon saw the God who is one, immortal, uncreated, invisible, and hidden in the inaccessible depths of his essence. So wrote Dr. Marriott Bay in his description of the principal monuments at the Egyptian Museum at Bulaq in Cairo. And he continued, "This God is the creator of the heavens and of the earth. He has made everything which exists, and nothing has been made without him. Such is the God who is reserved for the initiated of the sanctuary." Most of the great Egyptian scholars recognized all the gods of all the pantheons as phases or aspects of this great God. Their religion and their gods must not be judged by the standard of the religion and gods of any later civilized nation. We can only know what the Egyptians thought and believed by reading and studying the texts which they wrote. And a final opinion on their beliefs cannot be obtained until all their religious literature has been published. And Wallace Budge went on to say, "The general outline, however, of their religion is clear enough, and it shows us that they possessed a good, practical form of monotheism and a belief in immortality, which were already extremely ancient, even in the days when the pyramids were built." But an abstract impersonal God is far too vague and nebulous, and altogether unsuited to the layman's needs and comprehensions. It is too far removed from his concrete life here and now. So man needs a more intimate, personal deity to whom he can relate himself in a meaningful way. As he himself grows emotionally and spiritually, he can discard some of the narrow forms that previously meant so much to him. As to which one of these gods a man originally selects, this has as much to do with temperament and basic character as it has with training and conditioning. A soldier or an aggressive personality would find the worship of Horus, who presides over war, more suited to his structure, while a sculptor or a poet would certainly feel nearer to Hathor, who is the patron god of the arts. One person may need a warm, loving mother like Isis. Another may need to feel watched over by a stern, testy senior such as Horus. We may consider the Egyptian gods under two broad categories. First, as personifications of the vast creative forces of the universe, and secondly, since man is the microcosm of the macrocosm, as primitive archetypes within the depths of the unconscious psyche. In fact, Dr. Jung has laid down the proposition that since the primordial archetypes function within the unconscious depths of the human psyche, as the gods of olden times were said to have behaved, we might just as well call them gods, for their function is at all times inviolable, immutable, and consistent. That man was fashioned by the gods in the same manner, or on the same pattern as the cosmos itself, of which he is a part, was implicit in all Egyptian religious belief. Throughout many of the rituals in the Egyptian religious texts, many resemblances are made between the anatomies of various of the gods and of man himself. For example, the individual parts of man were placed under the protection of, or better still, were identified with a god or goddess. His hair was said to be the hair of Nui, the sky goddess. his face that of Aten, the solar disk, the eyes those of Hathor, his belly and back those of Sekhet, his phallus that of Ra, the creative God, and so on. In this way, he could truthfully exclaim, "There is no member of my body which is not a member of the gods." This therefore gave the Egyptian a supreme awareness of the divinity of his body itself. There was no part shameful, no physiological function unclean, for in him and in his every part there was ample evidence of a divine, time-transcending order. Each god in the Egyptian myth had a precise, well-defined function to perform in the cosmos, creative, preservative, or destructive as the case may be. And that function had been accurately ascertained by observation, both secular and religious, carried out over a long period of time, and the qualities and nature of the god were expressed in pictures. That the Egyptians conceived Ra, the sun god, to exist actually in such a conventional art form as that in which they painted him, I must not be construed as believing, nor that they considered the sun at midnight to assume the form of a beetle. What they actually did believe was that the symbol of the scarab expressed in various subtle ways the nature of the sun after the hour of setting at midnight. The cow, likewise, was a symbol of exuberant fertility. The ibis, a god of wisdom and supreme intelligence. The hawk, by reason of its ability to remain poised in the sky, was a perfect symbol of the divine self, which, detached from all things of earth and form, looks down upon them with the eye of equanimity. When Christianity developed later, there was a gradual absorption of some of the contents of the older religions. They were absorbed without too much difficulty. It is recognized by many scholars that some of the characteristics of Isis, for example, were attributed to Mary. Some of those of Osiris, the resurrection god, were similar to those relative to Christ. And many of the other gods were either attributed to the archangels and angels of tradition or embodied in the virtues and characters of the great saints of the early Christian era. It may help to further this idea if we consider individual gods and what they stood for. For example, one of the most important and early gods is named Ptah. His name literally means the opener, or one who opens the way. He is shown on some of the ancient drawings as a potter working at a potter's wheel with a lump of clay, from which he fashions the first men or the earth and the heavens. In his monumental text, The Gods of the Egyptians, Wallace Barge gives innumerable pages describing myths, showing that Ptah was the prime mover, the demiurge, who had with his own hands fashioned and created the worlds. As such, he refers in the microcosm to the secret self hidden in the heart of man. This refers to the self-born, or higher nature of man, without father or mother, because the inner nature of the soul is the matrix for the higher life, born through the exercise of right action, right thinking, and right feeling. Another important god is Thoth, or Tahuti, as he is often called, the divine intelligence, which, at the moment of creation, uttered the word which resulted in the formation of the worlds. Some statues show him with a wand of authority, and the ankh, which is the symbol of eternal life and joy, as well as with the stylus, the instrument for writing, a further evidence of his wisdom and sagacity. The Jungian psychologists might relate this God image to the unconscious archetype of the wise old man who appears at the appropriate time to guide the human soul in the direction of the reconciliation of the two opposites, and so towards spiritual freedom and spiritual wholeness. Isis, who is often shown carrying the child Horus, is believed by bards and some other historians to serve as the prototype of the Catholic version of Mary and the child Jesus. Many of the ancient litanies written about her worship are not too dissimilar to those found in any Roman Catholic missal. As the compassionate and omnipotent mother of both worlds, she drew to herself a vast throng of devotees and worshippers. She personified the vast reproductive power in nature, conceiving eternally and immaculately. It was her own life that was always used in graciously and successfully restoring those that had need of her. Once again, in psychological terms, she serves as a symbol of profound archetypal concepts which mediate between the depths of the soul and external reality, the inner matrix from which all ideas, feelings, and creativity have their origin. Many of the traditional signs and symbols borne by the gods have equally a very profound meaning. For example, the ankh, or the Venus symbol, which has become popularized in the current search for meaning, is the symbol of joy and love and eternal life. The lotus, found at the top of many of the wands carried by the gods, is a flower sacred to nature. The lotus has its roots in the material mud from which it springs, passes up through a more tenuous medium, the water, and then flowers wonderfully in the higher open medium, the air.
The matrix for the proper life, born through the exercise of right action, right thinking,
Symbolized in a simple way to appeal to the common mind.
of creation.
And the mother plant are now a virgin-born purity before they drop into the water to carry on life. Thus, the lotus flower came to symbolize immortality. According to one authority, the following facts are most significant. Ra, for example, represents fire. In man, consciousness. Shu represents air. In man, mentality or his mind. Seb, or earth, represents in man the material body and all its functions. Osiris, or water, in man, the higher emotional aspirations. According to this same authority, the upright bar of the cross symbolizes the inner nature of man, the inner world of feeling and emotion. To represent the effort man must make to live up to his ideals and thus express his real self, we shall take the crossbar of the cross to represent the will. In the beginning, the crossbar is found at the bottom of the upright bar. But as man progresses, and as a sign of his progress, the crossbar gradually rises or drops according as he exemplifies in his personal daily life the ethical teachings of his religion, be that what it may. Dr. Stewart also wrote that the Egyptians knew of only one way to worship God, and that was to refrain from doing evil. Through the power of independent choice, the individual rises above fate or blind evolutionary law because he possesses innately that power to exercise an independent, self-conscious, and rational volition. He may live his life in accordance with the rules of the great goddess Ma. That is to say, he has the power to do right, governed by his own inner equilibrium and a higher sense of necessity. Thus, the governing causes in the evolution of man are independent will and desire, which stimulate intellectual, emotional creativity, with a new moral purpose as a foundation and ethical satisfaction as an earned increment. And this is the becoming, the transformation, or the higher evolution indicated in the ancient symbolism of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. These are invocations of some of the Egyptian gods. These prayers have their roots in very ancient traditions. What value do these invocations have? Only if they are used frequently, and with sincerity, and with purpose, do they take on meaning. One of the guidelines that has been laid down by those in a position to guide us is to invoke often. The second one is to pray with enthusiasm, with fervor, with energy. Merely to utter these invocations, or any prayer for that matter, in a dull, routine way, is simply to express a mass of words wholly without meaning. These prayers have to be meditated upon, so that they come to stimulate the inner core of one's being. At the same time, an even more important matter is that while reciting the invocation, the imagination should be activated to form an image of the appropriate God form enveloping one's actual physical form. If Isis, then one should come to feel that one has about one the traditional female form of the goddess. And in the case of Tahuti, there should be the clear realization that one has an ibis head, the long neck of the bird under consideration, and if Horus is invoked, the divine falcon or hawk should be perceived in the imagination as clothing one's body. With regular, consistent practice, one may expect to feel the actual presence of the divine energy and to realize psychologically the nature of the God, and in fact to activate those unconscious archetypal forms and characteristics which they are representative of. This is not an intellectual process or activity by any means, but is a heightening of spiritual sensitivity and consciousness, so that its awareness is as much of a reality as is the sensing of one's own body or any part thereof. The invocation